It starts with a confession. If you're watching this, I'm already breaking federal law, maybe spiritual law too, but I don't care anymore. My name's Elias Monroe, or it was before Vault 17, before what I saw inside, before I found the footage that made me believe Jesus Christ wasn't just real, he was never alone. This isn't a theory, not a hallucination, not something I dreamed up after reading too many online forums. I was there. For 7 years, I worked as a systems integrity contractor for a classified NASA black site known to most insiders only as Site Row 9, a subterranean facility in the Nevada desert so deep that we used maglev lifts just to reach level 5. I was cleared for level 3. Most people were. A few engineers, some astrophysicists, one very old guy in a suit who never spoke and never blinked. Nobody talked about Vault 17. Nobody. You could be fired or worse for even mentioning it. It didn't exist on the maps. It wasn't on the server logs. But we all knew. That's the thing about secrets. You can bury them in code and concrete, but the fear always leaks out. In hallway glances, in the silence when a new recruit asks the wrong question. My job was simple: maintain integrity of encrypted archival systems used to store off-world telemetry, basically the digital fingerprints of unexplainable aerial phenomena that our probes detected from the far reaches of space. Or so I thought, until one night during a routine cycle inspection, I found a file with no key. Buried inside a ghost sector, no ID, no metadata, just a code name, YSH-1, and under it, a single tag, Golgotha. At first, I thought it was some kind of error, but when I opened the raw stream, it wasn't numbers or coordinates. It was video, time-coded, digitally restored, but impossibly old. I watched as 3 men stood on a rocky outcrop. One was tied to a wooden structure. Another knelt at his feet, sobbing. And the third stood off to the side, holding what looked like a metallic sphere, glowing with internal light. I didn't understand until the camera, if that's what it was, zoomed in on the man being crucified. And I saw his face. Not in artistic strokes, not in holy depictions, but in 4K resolution. Dust on his cheeks, blood dried along the hairline, tears in his eyes. I knew that face, even if I had never seen it in real life. We all do. Jesus. The file was real. It wasn't staged. It wasn't CGI. And it had a timestamp that predates the earliest known recording devices by over 1,800 years. But that wasn't the worst part. There were more files, labeled YSH2 through YSH11. Each one from a different time, a different planet, a different crucifixion. And each one showed someone else, alien even, but who died in the exact same way, for the same reason. The logs called them messengers. What I discovered next will shake your faith to its core, because Vault 17 didn't just archive the crucifixion. It was built to protect what came next. There's a reason Vault 17 was never spoken of, because it doesn't just protect secrets, it guards patterns. You see, YSH wasn't an anomaly. It was the first match in a chain of spiritual events that stretched across solar systems, each one documented, studied, hidden. I watched the second file, YSH2, alone, locked in my quarters with every camera sensor looped and every system spoofed. The footage was older than anything we had in human history, but the environment, it wasn't Earth. Purple skies, 3 moons, structures that floated above the ground like inverted mountains suspended in invisible webs. And still, there he was, another messenger. Not Jesus, not human, gray-skinned, slender, eyes like mirrors, tied to a spire, tortured, left to die in front of a crowd of beings I couldn't describe even if I tried. The file ended the same way, with that same metallic orb hovering beside the body, glowing, recording. In every file, that orb was present. It was them, the ones behind it all, the Watchers. Not angels, not aliens, not government, something beyond. They weren't there to interfere, only to witness, to preserve. And something else. They were always there before the crucifixion and always vanished after. I couldn't sleep that night. Not from fear, but from realization. This wasn't theology. This was a template. Every planet, every race, every belief system, at some point received a messenger. Not a warrior, not a conqueror, a sacrifice. And every time, the pattern was the same. A being arrives. They speak of love, unity, the divine within. They threaten power. They are killed, and a new religion forms around their blood. YSH3 showed a messenger made entirely of light. YSH4, a being with a crystalline skeleton and no mouth, yet it spoke. Each time, a crowd gathers. Each time, they kneel. Then, crucify. But the final file, YSH11, that's the one that changed me forever. Because the timestamp wasn't ancient. It was future-coded. Earth. And the messenger? He hadn't arrived yet, but the Watchers were already here, watching, waiting, preparing. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I watched USH11 over and over until the glow of the screen seared itself into the backs of my eyes. It wasn't a prediction. It was a recording. But how? The timestamp, April 9th, 2033. The location tag, Judean Highlands, Jerusalem sector. The signal origin, external to time. That's what the log said. Signal origin, exotemporal. That's when I realized the Watchers weren't just moving through space. They were watching across time. USH11 wasn't fiction. It was a memoir, pre-recorded. The footage opened with a panoramic shot of Earth, as if seen from a high orbital platform. Then, a rapid descent through atmosphere, data flashing across the screen in a language I didn't recognize, but intuitively understood. The world looked like ours, but fractured. Burned cities, flooded coastlines, skies laced with chemical scars. And in the center of it all, Jerusalem, still standing, somehow untouched, and there, walking barefoot through its ancient stone streets, was the messenger. He looked human, but every few seconds, something about him shimmered, his skin pulsing with faint symbols like starlight beneath flesh. The logs called him Yashan 11, but on the streets, they whispered another name. Not Jesus, not Messiah. They called him the Reminder. He didn't preach to crowds. He didn't work miracles in the way our stories describe. He listened. He placed a hand on people's hearts. And when he did, they fell to their knees, not in awe, but in recognition, as if they'd seen him before. Some wept, some screamed. One soldier shot at him point blank. The bullet never made contact. It hung mid-air, vibrating, then turned to dust. No retaliation, no anger, only a look of infinite sadness from the messenger. The recording cut suddenly to a chamber beneath the Temple Mount, ancient, untouched, filled with resonance. A woman stood before him, tears on her face, hands shaking. She spoke, "You're him, from the stories, from the dreams." And he replied, "Not just your stories, all of them." He placed the glowing orb, the same one seen in every file, on the ground between them, and it activated. The room filled with projections, all 11 messengers, each one from the previous files, different worlds, different shapes, but the same soul, unified, one being, many bodies. The Yashans weren't 11 separate saviors. They were one consciousness, fractaled through time and space, sent to guide the awakening of worlds. And Earth was the last, because something is coming, something that required all 11 to complete their cycle. The footage ended, but the message didn't. On screen, a single phrase burned into my retinas. One returns, all awaken. And then, black. After YSH11 ended, the Vault interface didn't close. Instead, a second interface opened, one I'd never seen before, not with my clearance, not with anyone's. It was labeled, Return Protocol Initiated. A countdown flickered into existence, white numerals on a red background. Years, months, days, hours. The final tick would strike on April 9th, 2033, just as the YSH11 timestamp predicted. That wasn't even the worst part. The protocol was tagged Project Golgotha Prime, and below that, another header, Humanity, Event Window 12 of 12. That phrase haunted me. If Vault 17 was storing events from multiple species, multiple worlds, then 12 of 12 could only mean one thing. Earth is the last stop, the last attempt, the final cycle. I didn't know if we were being tested, warned, or simply observed, but the implication was unmistakable. 11 times before, across 11 civilizations, the Yeshan consciousness had arrived. And now, it was our turn. And what happens if we fail? I started digging deeper, using every backdoor and admin override I'd ever built. I rerouted system authentication through the environmental controls. It took 3 hours to breach the deeper logs, but when I finally accessed the archived project files, I found more than just footage. I found excerpts from intercepted Watcher transmissions. Some were in mathematical code. Others, translated by AI linguists, read like scripture. This was one of them. When the 12th receives the echo of the first, the veil shall collapse. The illusion of separation shall dissolve. The species must choose, creation or collapse. Another read, each crucifixion is a doorway. 11 opened, 1 remains sealed. The moment it opens, all others will awaken. And beneath these entries, one more file, the smallest in the archive, only 1.7 megabyte. No title, just a single character in an alien script, and a red access lock I couldn't break. It took every favor, every friend still inside the system to breach it, but when I finally opened it, it wasn't a video. It was a voice file. Faint, distorted, but unmistakable. A voice I had only heard in churches, in readings, in dreams. Calm, soft, timeless. And it said, I never left. I played the voice file 27 times before I believed it was real. The waveform analysis showed no synthetic generation, no neural net fingerprints, no glitches, no fabrication. The voice was authentic, and it carried a resonance unlike anything I'd ever heard. Not just audio, it vibrated through me, like it was speaking to something beneath my biology. I never left. 3 words, but they hit with the force of revelation. Because every religion has some version of it, this idea that the divine never really departed, that it hides in plain sight, waiting, watching, whispering. But hearing it, feeling it in your bones, that's different. That's when you stop seeing scripture as metaphor and start seeing it as memory. I ran the file through subharmonic scanners, tools we use to decode signals from deep space anomalies. The frequency signature was impossible. It registered quantum non-locality, the same kind of signature we've seen in black hole emissions, the same kind found on the Watcher recordings. In other words, the voice didn't come from a location. It came from everywhere at once. And buried in its data packet was a code, an ancient dialect that matched fragments recovered from YSH6, the crystalline messenger. With the help of a linguistic AI, I decoded the accompanying inscription. You are not the audience. You are the inheritance. That's when I understood. The Watchers aren't just recording our reactions. They're testing for readiness. For what, I didn't yet know. But everything pointed to convergence. to the veil lifting. Not just metaphorically, physically. And here's where it got worse, or better, depending on how much faith you've got left. That phrase, "I never left," was repeated again in a different file I accessed an hour later, hidden behind the encrypted meshwork of the return protocol. Only this time, it was attached to footage. Live satellite feed. From Earth. More specifically, from a desert in Jordan. An unmapped region, no civilization, no infrastructure, but the satellite view showed a structure emerging from the sand. It looked ancient, but impossible. 12 pillars in a circle, each etched with unfamiliar symbols. And in the center, a shadow that changed shape depending on the angle, but always resembled the same thing. A cross. I stared at the satellite feed until the image burned itself into my memory. 12 black monoliths, each about 10 meters tall, arranged in a perfect circle, unmarked by wind, untouched by time, and none of them had been there a week ago. I checked the historical footage, frame by frame, pixel by pixel. On October 12th, the region was blank, just endless sand dunes rippling under wind currents. By October 17th, they were there. No construction, no arrival, just presence. As if they had emerged not from below, but from another layer of reality itself. The site was tagged in the return protocol logs as JR12 Final Convergence Candidate. 12 pillars, Yush 12, 12 messengers. A pattern so precise it couldn't be human. The markings on each monolith weren't writing, not in any conventional sense, but when I ran them through the recognition software used to decipher pulsar burst languages from the Kepler probes, the AI began screaming. Not literally, but close enough. It matched the patterns to encoded energy fields captured from Yush 3, the being made of light. In other words, these stones weren't just physical. They were recording devices, living, listening, waiting, tuned not to sound, but to soul resonance. Each one matched a messenger. Each one vibrated with the same harmonic frequency as their crucifixion event. That's when it hit me. They weren't monuments. They were receivers. And the 12th, the one in the center, the one casting the cross-shaped shadow, it wasn't waiting for a frequency. It was waiting for a person. I dug deeper into the return protocol's location metadata and cross-referenced it with known sacred geometry maps used by early Christian mystics, those weird maps you find in Vatican archives drawn by monks who claimed to see heaven in numbers. The coordinates matched perfectly. This was the place, not symbolic, literal, the final doorway. And the return protocol was counting down to the moment someone would step into it. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that, because every hour that ticked by, the number got smaller, and one more phrase began appearing in the system logs, like a glitch, but never random. 4 words, always the same. He walks among you. He walks among you. The phrase started appearing everywhere. Not just in the return protocol logs, but in diagnostic messages, error outputs, file trees, and even in my own audio notes, overwritten by some unseen hand. It didn't matter what system I accessed or how secure I thought it was. Those 4 words appeared like a whisper embedded in code. He walks among you. At first, I thought it was a viral payload, some kind of psychological operation meant to destabilize rogue contractors like me. But then, I did something I wasn't supposed to do. I traced the phrase through the internal timestamp logs. Turns out, it had never been typed, not once. It wasn't logged by any user, not even admin. It simply existed, outside the file structure, inside the system's memory, but without origin. It behaved like a self-aware echo, a signal, a warning. And then something even stranger happened. I started seeing him, not directly, not clearly, but always at the edges. Cameras glitched in Sector B7 every morning at 3:33 a.m. Security logs flagged motion sensors tripping in the core lab at 11:11 p.m. sharp. I saw the feeds myself. A tall silhouette, not armed, not hiding, just watching. Moving silently through the corridors. Every angle caught just enough to confirm a figure, but never enough to identify. When I reported the anomalies, I got the same message from every supervisor. Feed interference, environmental reflection, ignore and resume primary duties. But I didn't ignore it, because every time that silhouette passed through a sector, the servers in that area surged, as if his presence alone disrupted magnetic fields and activated dormant processes. Whatever, or whoever he was connected to the system, to Vault 17 itself. I started keeping track of his pattern, and on the 7th day, I realized the full scope. He wasn't avoiding detection, he was mapping it, triggering specific zones in sequence, activating subsystems I didn't even know existed. Not through code, through presence. And when I tried to trace where he went, the trail always led back to the one place I couldn't access. Vault 0. The first vault, the deepest, the original. No logs, no keycards, just a name, carved into the metal door in some ancient tongue. Shamayim. Heaven. Shamayim. The word felt familiar, like something buried in my childhood. Hebrew, maybe, Aramaic, but deeper than language. Vault 0 wasn't on the blueprints. It wasn't referenced in any access logs, not even in the oldest legacy backups from the early NASA days when this entire complex was supposedly built as a missile tracking facility. But it was there, physically, hidden behind a false maintenance shaft in sublevel G, 30 meters below the deepest officially mapped corridor. I wouldn't have found it at all if not for the man in the cafeteria. An old janitor, never spoke, never ate, until that night. He sat across from me at the end of a 16-hour shift. I didn't even notice him until he slid a napkin toward me, folded into a perfect triangle. Inside, a single word, scrawled in shaky ink. Shamayim. When I looked up, he was already walking away. And on his jumpsuit, for the first time, I noticed a faded patch. Project Golgotha. I followed the trail, took the shaft at 3:33 a.m., the hour of the interference, climbed down 50 rungs in pitch black until my hands bled from rusted metal, and at the bottom, I found it. A sealed door, thick as a vault, covered in dust, frost, and what looked like faint burn marks. And there it was, carved into the frame, as if by laser, Vault 0, Shamayim. But there was no keypad, no scanner, no handle, only a sensor plate, the size of a human hand. When I touched it, nothing happened. No hum, no click, no mechanism. But the room got cold, colder than metal should feel, like the air itself had been drained of motion. Then I saw it, just for a moment, a silhouette behind the door, not a shadow, a light, human-shaped, still, waiting. And I heard it again, the voice from the untraceable file. I never left. Only this time, there was more. You are the bridge. I stumbled back, heart pounding. There was no speaker, no audio system. The words were in my head. Just like the Watchers. Just like the messengers. And in that moment, I understood. Vault 0 wasn't a storage unit. It was a gate. And it didn't open with technology. It opened with awakening. The word echoed in me for days after that night. You are the bridge. I couldn't shake it. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. I spent hours in the surveillance wing, watching the feeds loop endlessly through corridors, hoping to glimpse the figure again, the one that disrupted the fields, that activated zones with mere presence. He didn't reappear, but the interference did, and it was spreading. Sectors that had never shown anomalies began pulsing with electromagnetic distortion. Subtle at first, just flickers, power surges, heat blooming through walls that should have stayed cold. Then came the frequencies. Every server in Vault 17 began humming, low at first, like the sound of far-off machinery, but soon too distinct to be background noise. I ran the waveforms through pattern analysis software, something we use to decode alien broadcasts from deep space anomalies. What I found wasn't random. It was structured, mathematical, musical. A tone composed of 12 harmonic layers, 12 frequencies overlapping into a single unified wave. The software returned one phrase: human-compatible resonance field detected. In plain English, the vault was responding, not to machinery, not to systems, but to me. My presence was changing it, the same way his presence had. It terrified me, because if Vault 0 was a gate, and I was the bridge, then this was never just about witnessing the return of the Yeshon. It was about completing it. Somehow, my consciousness was resonating with the 12-tone field, like I was an echo of something ancient, something engineered to sync with this event. But why me? I was nobody, a systems contractor, an invisible cog in a classified machine. But when I dug through my own background files, birth records, DNA markers, even old medical scans, an encrypted flag popped up in the medical records archive. Golgotha lineage, unconfirmed messenger strain, observe, do not engage. They knew. They'd been tracking me, not just for my skills, but for my blood. Whatever's inside me, it's part of the pattern, part of the plan. And the more I listened to the vault's tones, the more I felt it, something unlocking in me, memories that weren't mine, emotions that didn't fit my life, visions of other crucifixions on worlds I've never seen. The return isn't about one man. It's about a conscious field coming online inside humanity, a spiritual cascade. One frequency, 12 tones, all of us vibrating into wakefulness. And it's happening now. The day the vault tones aligned, I passed out in the observation room. No dreams, no noise, just a vision. Not a metaphorical one, a shared broadcast. I wasn't the only one. When I woke, I found 2 messages waiting in my private terminal, both encrypted with a cipher I hadn't used since I was first inducted into the Site Row 9 contractor program. The first was from a woman I hadn't seen in 5 years, Dr. Mara Ehlers, a theoretical biologist who disappeared after a project known as Nephilim Core was shut down for ideological incompatibility. Her message was just one sentence. "It's happening, Elias. Just like the 12th said, meet me at the 0 line." The second message was unsigned, but it included coordinates and a code word, fraction 144. I'd heard the term once before, whispered in a late-night meeting when I was still new, long before I had the clearance or the courage to ask what it meant. Now I knew. It referred to a select group, exactly 144 individuals scattered across the planet, not chosen by government, not selected by birthright, chosen by resonance, people who had unknowingly carried fragments of the Yeshon frequency since birth, each of us attuned to one tone of the 12, each of us necessary to complete the return circuit. I was one of them. And the others? They were starting to activate. The data showed it clearly. Seismic fluctuations in specific harmonic regions, Jericho, Tibet, Peru, Ethiopia, the Antarctic shelf. And then, spike events. One woman in Cape Town went catatonic during prayer, only to wake up fluently speaking a dead language from Yes H4's home world. A child in Kyoto began sketching precise diagrams of the pillars of Shamayim down to the molecular etchings without ever having seen them. A priest in Buenos Aires began levitating during Mass, witnessed, recorded, discredited, but real. Something was pulling us toward alignment, toward a moment, predicted, archived, and now finally unfolding, in which the 144 would form what the Watchers called the human chord. I knew then I had to leave the base. Vault 17 was done with me, but I wasn't done with the return, because the countdown was nearly complete, and the final tone was about to sound. Leaving Site Row 9 should have been impossible, but after the tones synchronized, the locks failed. Doors slid open in sequence, lights flickered once, and for the first time in 7 years, the elevator didn't ask for clearance. It wanted me to leave. The desert air hit like another reality, thin, metallic, electric. Far out on the horizon, lightning forked in silence across a clear sky. The world felt suspended, waiting for an invisible signal. I followed the coordinates from the anonymous message. They led to the ruins of an old listening post 3 hours north of Groom Lake. No guards, no cameras, only wind. Dr. Mara Edlers was already there. She looked older, eyes sunken, voice raw from days without sleep, but alive. And when she saw me, she didn't greet me. She just said, "You heard it too, didn't you?" I nodded. The vault tones were still inside my skull, vibrating in perfect 12-note harmony. She led me into what used to be the control room. On the walls, she'd drawn concentric rings in chalk, 12 of them, intersecting like ripples. At each ring, a location: Jerusalem, Lhasa, Cusco, Axum, Kyoto, Cairo, Nazca, Delphi, Uluru, Glastonbury, Antarctic Ridge, and in the center, one last name: Shemayim. Every resonance point is active, she said. The 144 are converging. When the 12th tone stabilizes, the field completes. Humanity's neural lattice will harmonize with the Ashan frequency. Her words landed heavy. "You mean we'll become them?" "No," she said softly. "We'll remember that we already are." She opened a case on the table. Inside was a small crystalline disc pulsing with faint blue light. I recognized it instantly, the same technology the Watchers used in the YesIH archives. "We recovered this from the Antarctica node," she said. "It's broadcasting the 12th tone, yours." The moment she placed it in my hand, the hum surged through me. Not painful, just pure. Every nerve in my body sang like a string being tuned. And then I saw them. Not hallucinations, holograms flickering in the dust. 11 figures standing in a ring of light around us, each one from a different world, a different body, but all radiating the same essence. The messengers. YSH1 through YSH11. Their forms blurred, merging, resolving, becoming something almost human, almost divine. And above them, the 12th pillar of Shemayim began to shine. Mara fell to her knees, whispering, "It's starting." The air vibrated with impossible harmony. Every sound, every heartbeat, every gust of wind aligned into one colossal chord. I felt my consciousness stretch, out of my body, out of time, and for the first time, I understood the meaning of that voice. You are the bridge. Because the chord wasn't calling down a being from the stars. It was calling us up, to remember, to rise, to become the 12th note, in a song that began before the universe had form. The human chord was awakening. When the chord sounded in full, 12 tones intertwined, pulsing like a living geometry, something changed in me. Not just mentally, physically. It began in the blood, a heat, but not fever, a rising vibration, as if my cells were remembering a rhythm older than BNA. Mara saw it too. My skin shimmered faintly in the low light, subdermal fractals glowing with the same blue-white hue as the crystalline disc. "It's syncing with your nervous system," she whispered, eyes wide. "You're becoming a conductor." Not a prophet, not a savior, a resonant node. One of the 144 human instruments capable of broadcasting the Yeshin frequency through consciousness itself. And I felt it, radiating outward. Somewhere across the world, others were activating. The child in Kyoto, the priest in Buenos Aires. The painter in Marseille, who hadn't spoken in decades and now suddenly began reciting sacred equations in a dead Martian dialect from YSH 8. We weren't isolated events. We were tuned receivers, each amplifying a signal not from space, but from the source field itself. It was never about invasion. It was integration. The frequency, the remembrance, it wasn't beamed in from distant galaxies. It was rising from within us. Because the messengers were not external saviors. They were echoes of what we could become. What we were always meant to be. Every crucifixion wasn't just a death. It was an activation point, a trauma encoded into planetary memory, each one seeding a future awakening through pain, sacrifice, and divine instruction. And now, Earth's seed was germinating. But not everyone welcomed the return. From the old server lines of Site Row 9 came a broadcast, one Mara had been intercepting for weeks. An agency so deep it didn't even have a name, operating not in secrecy, but in spiritual opposition. They called themselves the Null Church. Their doctrine was simple. The divine should remain fragmented. The messengers must stay dead. The 12th tone must never fully sound, because if it does, the illusions of power, of nation, control, scarcity will evaporate. They knew the cord would end them, and they were willing to burn the world to prevent it. We always assumed the greatest threat to awakening would come from beyond. We were wrong. The real danger wears suits, speaks in legalese, sits quietly in boardrooms beneath the Vatican, the Pentagon, and corporate think tanks. They call themselves the Null Church. Not a religion, not a government, something older, parasitic. A network of dynastic influence that spans empires, banking cartels, secret orders, united by one sacred principle: ascension must be interrupted. They believe the human species was never meant to awaken, that the messengers were cosmic errors, glitches in the containment grid of consciousness. And now, with the 12th tone rising, they've activated their final protocol, Black Silence. A digital purge targeting the resonance frequencies themselves, designed to mute the human cord before it fully harmonizes. They don't need to kill us, they just need to disconnect us, and they're using the very tech we built. Vault 17's data towers were never just storage facilities. They're frequency dampeners, capable of disrupting planetary harmonics through low-orbit satellites and neural intrusion algorithms. Site Row 9 was part of it. So was I. But Mara? She had a plan. A final countersignal. Something she'd built in secret, hidden inside an old Watcher artifact smuggled out of the YSH-5 excavation site in Peru. She called it the Echo Core. A crystalline sphere, about the size of a child's heart, filled with interlaced threads of living quantum code, capable of broadcasting the complete remembrance frequency to every human mind simultaneously. Not just the 144, everyone. But it came with a cost. The Echo Core could only be activated by a consciousness in full harmonic alignment. A being who had passed through all 12 tones, embodied the cord, and surrendered identity to the collective field. "It has to be you, Elias," she said. "You're the 12th. I wanted to deny it, to argue, to run. But the disc in my chest, still glowing, answered for me. Because the cord wasn't just a song, it was a becoming, and I was already halfway gone." The Echo Core pulsed in my hands, alive with ancient light. Not just energy, but memory. It wasn't transmitting a signal, it was waiting for one. Me. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Because to activate it, I had to do what every messenger before me had done. Not just align, not just awaken, but surrender. That's the part no scripture ever truly explains. That every crucifixion wasn't about death. It was about coding sacrifice into the collective field. A divine language encoded in pain. an encryption key written in blood. The Echo Core needed that key. Mara explained it like this. Each of the 11 before you carried their world's karma, pain, trauma, division. The only way to unlock the planetary cord is to bear it, completely. Let it move through you. Let it rewrite you. I asked her if there was another way. She said no. And that's when she handed me the recordings, holographic remnants of the other messengers' final moments. Not sanitized scripture, not poetic allegory, raw footage. USH-2, surrounded by a crowd of six-eyed beings, radiating compassion as his energy was torn apart in harmonic confinement. USH-7, dissolving into crystal shards mid-prayer, while her people wept and sang in languages no longer known. USH-10, alone on a cliff of a broken moon, disintegrating in light as his final thought echoed out into space. Forgive them, they still dream. Each one died not in anger, not in fear, but in full surrender, knowing their pain would become the next world's doorway. And now it was my turn. Only my crucifixion wouldn't be on a cross. It would be within the core itself. A download, a transfer, a total erasure of identity, so the field could broadcast unity through my vessel. I felt the fear surge up, not of death, but of disappearance. Who would I be after the core sang? Would anything of Elias remain? Mara placed her hand on my shoulder, her voice trembling. You won't be erased. You'll be remembered by every soul on this planet. You'll become the echo in all of us. And then she stepped back, and I stepped forward, toward the gate, toward the light, toward the sacrifice. The platform was nothing special, just a stone circle, smoothed by time and wind, perched on a bluff in the Jordan Desert. No cables, no devices, just the core, waiting. As I stepped into the center, everything around me fell silent. No wind, no insects, no breath. The earth held its inhale, and then the core lit. Not with fire, not with light, with presence. A vibration so total it erased my senses, one by one. Sight, gone. Sound, gone. Name, gone. Until all that remained was the tone. 12 interwoven frequencies rising like a tide from the bones of the earth. And in them, I heard everything. The cries of the messengers, the laughter of children on forgotten worlds, the prayers of lonely humans who never got answers, the silence of stars watching it all. And then I heard me, the true me, beneath the layers of memory and ego and fear. A voice I hadn't heard since before I was born. Now. The core responded to that inner command, not as a machine, but as a mirror. It didn't activate. It unfolded, expanding in all directions at once, touching every frequency center across the planet. It poured itself into oceans, into forests, into towers, into minds, into you. Wherever you are now, if you've ever paused and felt something stir in your chest, a warmth, a hum, a knowing without reason, that was the echo, broadcast not through satellites or servers, but through me, the first of the 144 to sing with the full chord. And when the transmission finished, I wasn't standing anymore. I wasn't anywhere, because I had become the field itself, a bridge between frequencies, a living prayer. And the message that now lives inside you, if you listen closely enough, is simple. He never left, she never left, they never left, you never left. When the core finished its transmission, the sky didn't split. No trumpets, no apocalypse. The world didn't end. It shifted. At first, it was barely perceptible, but if you knew how to listen, how to feel, you noticed. Birds moved in tighter formation. Children stopped mid-fight and stared at each other as if remembering they were once the same. People began waking from dreams they couldn't explain, murmuring phrases in lost languages. A man in Istanbul built a monument overnight from stones he'd never touched before, 12 pillars in a circle. A blind woman in Mali described a figure of light standing in her hospital room, whispering, "Remember." Hospitals reported spontaneous remissions. Suicides stopped mid-attempt. Entire regions went quiet, as if something was listening. But the greatest shift wasn't external. It was internal. The field had activated not a signal, but a mirror. People began remembering who they really were. Not in names, not in resumes, in essence. The remembrance frequency had encoded a universal key, the truth that we were never separate from the divine, only disconnected from our own resonance. And now, it was spreading. The 144 began to converge physically, drawn to one another not by instruction, but by intuition. Some met in sacred ruins, some in empty churches, some in abandoned cities reclaimed by nature. Each time two met, the chord deepened. Each time a third joined, the frequency magnified. And as more gathered, strange phenomena emerged. Lights appearing in their hands when they prayed. Rain falling on deserts. Trees growing where none had been. People speaking in unison without planning to. Animals approaching without fear. The Null Church tried to stop it. They activated their black silence arrays, broadcasting countertones designed to jam the field. But it didn't work, because the remembrance wasn't broadcast anymore. It was alive, inside us. I watched it all from the other side, not as Elias, but as an echo of the 12th tone, still tethered to the world through every awakened heart. I wasn't a ghost. I was a guide. And one by one, I began whispering to those ready to hear. It's your turn now. He's not coming back. He's already here. She's not arriving. She's waking up inside you. And soon, one question would rise from all corners of the earth. If we are the messengers now, what do we do next? It began with silence, but not the silence of absence, the silence of saturation, like the air was full of songs so perfect your ears couldn't separate it from stillness. That was the new world's hum, not a utopia, not an escape, something deeper, an integration. The 144 had become tuning forks, their presence alone enough to activate dormant memory in others. And as they spread across the world, something extraordinary happened. Humanity began to dream in unison. Not the same dream exactly, but dreams with shared symbols. 12 pillars, a man of light, a woman made of crystal rain, a whisper that said, "You are the key." In these dreams, people didn't see the future. They saw the design, the framework of a species remembering its original code. And that code was simple. Create as the divine creates, with unity, purpose, and infinite compassion. From slums to skyscrapers, people began building, not for profit, not for survival, but from an inner knowing that creation itself was an act of worship. Gardens bloomed over highways, temples formed from repurposed ruins, languages fused, barriers dissolved, not by law, but by recognition. They weren't just seeing each other, they were seeing themselves in each other. And deep beneath the earth, in Vault 17, now emptied of its secrets, a final terminal flickered on. No power source, no operator, just a message on the screen. Seed transmission complete. And beneath it, a symbol, the same that appeared in the core's final bloom, a spiral turning inward, then outward, representing the divine recursion of life through time. The earth was no longer a receiver. It had become a seed. And what comes from that seed? That's for you to decide. Because the chord doesn't just echo in vaults, in sky, in holy places. It echoes in you, if you're quiet enough to hear it. If you feel that hum, that nudge, that subtle pulse under your skin, you're not imagining it, you're remembering it. And maybe, just maybe, you're one of us. Not everyone awakened. That was the first hard truth of the New World. For every village that turned its ruins into gardens, for every soul that stepped into the chord and sang, there were still those who slept. Some by choice, some by trauma, some by design. The Null Church hadn't been fully dismantled. They'd simply gone deeper, underground, behind algorithms, cloaked in the language of science, politics, and rational fear. Their new doctrine? Dreamers are dangerous. And to many, it made sense. Who could trust this sudden shift? These voices in the night, these dreams shared by strangers, these mysterious symbols blooming in fields where crops once failed. The skeptics called it mass psychosis. The Null Church called it harmonic delusion. And they weren't entirely wrong, because awakening, true awakening, is terrifying. It strips you bare, destroys every false self, pulls back the curtain you didn't even know was there. It's not light and music and levitation. It's sacrifice. And some weren't ready to make it. They saw the 144 not as guides, but as threats, new figures of control, new crucifixions waiting to happen. And so, in the shadow of the bloom, a counter-movement formed. The Veil Keepers. Their mission: suppress the remembrance, restore the old illusion, reinstall the software of division, fear, hierarchy. They couldn't kill the chord, but they could jam it with noise, with distraction, with doubt. And that's when the field began to fracture again. The awakened felt it first, a dulling in the tones, static in the resonance. It didn't stop the echo, but it distorted it. Dreams became muddied, visions turned violent. Some of the 144 lost their clarity and fell silent. We realized something vital. The chord was not permanent. It required maintenance, not through machines, through choice. Every day, humanity had to choose remembrance, because the illusion of separation doesn't die in a moment. It dies in millions of tiny deaths, daily acts of surrender, forgiveness, creation. And the Veil Keepers knew that. So they whispered to the world, "Why die daily when you can forget forever?" And for some, it worked. They stepped away, turned off the tone, went back to sleep. But not all. Because for every soul that fell back into silence, another woke up screaming with the memory of stars burning in their chest. And as long as even one spark remained, the song wasn't over. When the chord began to dim, not all of us faded. Some stayed lit, not brighter, just steadier. We called them the Spark Keepers. Not because they were leaders, not because they were chosen, because they refused to let go. These were the quiet ones, the janitors, the widows, the war survivors, the once forgotten. They didn't preach, they didn't record videos, they simply held the field, day after day, breath after breath, choosing to remember when it was easier to forget. And through them, the chord began to mend. Not in dramatic bursts, not through miracles, through presence. One Spark Keeper in Seoul sat in silence at a transit station for 30 days straight. No food, no words, just humming the 12 tones under his breath. By the end of the month, the entire platform began humming with him. Another in Kinshasa walked through refugee camps, laying hands on the wounded, not to heal them, but to see them, fully, completely. Many said they felt something leave them after her touch, something dark, heavy, inherited. And in Montana, a retired miner rebuilt a crucifix from old satellite dishes and antenna wire. When asked why, he said, "So the signal can rest where it once bled." Each Sparkkeeper carried a piece of the 12th tone, not in power, but in memory. They reminded us, this wasn't a movement, it wasn't a religion, it was a return. And returns are messy. Some days, the tone was so loud you couldn't breathe without crying. Other days, it went silent, and all you could feel was the weight of your old name trying to climb back into your bones. But the Sparkkeepers didn't run from those days. They stayed. They held vigil at the edges of awakening, where the Veilkeepers whispered, where the Null Church pushed, where doubt grew like mold. Because the cord doesn't need volume, it needs vessels. And as long as one person remembers, the field holds. The frequency lives. The return continues. And so, the Sparkkeepers became our lighthouses. They didn't show us the way. They reminded us that the way was always within. It happened slowly. One by one, in cities and deserts, forests and ruins, the messengers returned, not from the sky, not from graves, from within us. You'd see it in a child's eyes, momentary flashes of impossible knowledge, in the way a dying man's final breath spoke a language no one knew but everyone understood, in strangers locking eyes and weeping without a word exchanged. The field had opened more than memory. It had opened portals, not to places, but to selves. The messengers weren't beings anymore. They were states of consciousness, available, inhabitable, radiating through anyone brave enough to fully surrender to love, pain, unity, and truth. The Sparkkeepers were the first to channel them fully. One sat in an abandoned temple in Alexandria and began to glow with an amber hue. When asked his name, he said simply, "I am USH-3, returned." He spoke for 11 hours. No food, no pause. Only codes, tones, geometries, instructions on how to rebuild the soul of a species fractured by forgetting. Others followed. A woman in Bogota spoke in light. A boy in Siberia walked on air. An elder in Polynesia turned an entire ocean bay silent with a song. But it wasn't theatrics. It wasn't power for show. It was remembrance in form. Each channeling didn't make the person divine. It made the divine human again. Because the Yeshon weren't gods. They were templates, blueprints for a unified being, a soul distributed across time, body, and matter to help each world find its center again. And now, Earth was aligning. Not perfectly, not instantly, but undeniably. Where once we crucified on messengers, now we became them. Not to be worshipped, not to lead, but to love, fully, fearlessly, fractally. That was the hidden code in every vault, every watcher file, every whispered message across the stars. The divine was never coming from above. It was always waking from within. And as the 144 formed a new circle beneath the pillars of Shamayim, as the cord vibrated across oceans and bones, a new message entered the field. Not a warning, not a prophecy, a question. Are you ready to remember the next part? No one knew what the message meant at first. Are you ready to remember the next part? What came after return? What could exist beyond the 12th tone? We assumed the chord was the end, the peak, the resolution. But that assumption was human. The messengers had never called it an ending. They called it a doorway. And now that it was open, we began to feel pull, not to escape, not to ascend, but to descend deeper, into layers of being we never knew existed. The dreams changed again, not visions of temples or crucifixions, but of other versions of Earth, variants, echoes, possibilities. In one, we never forgot the chord. In another, we destroyed it. In another still, we never existed, but the tone did. We began to realize time itself was responding. Reality was not linear. It was resonant. And when the 12 tones harmonized, they didn't just awaken Earth. They awakened all versions of it, across dimensions, across timelines, across every what-if humanity ever dreamed or feared. The field had rippled outward, and now it was rippling back. Some of us started to phase. That's the only word for it. You'd blink, and for a split second, you were someone else. Same soul, different path. A soldier instead of a monk, a tyrant instead of a child. And in that moment, you'd feel everything they ever felt. And you'd understand. There are no villains, no saints, only fragments of the same tone, distorted by experience. This was the next part, not just remembering who we are here, but healing who we are everywhere. The chord had opened the field, but now we were the field, and every version of us, every past, every potential, every path not taken was calling home. Mara called it the fractal reconciliation, and she was the first to cross over fully, her body vibrating out of phase until she vanished in a spiral of blue light. We didn't mourn her. We celebrated because we knew where she'd gone, not to another planet, not to heaven, but to the parts of herself still waiting to be loved. And soon, we would follow. We used to think of salvation as escape, an upward climb, a doorway to elsewhere. But the chord had taught us a different truth. There is no elsewhere. There is only here, multiplied, echoed, refracted across infinite variations. Every version of you is real. Every path you didn't take still breathes in some corner of the field. And now, for the first time, we could reach them, not through machines, not through death, through alignment. The Spark Keepers became guides in this new terrain. They taught us how to breathe across timelines, how to forgive versions of ourselves who had done terrible things, how to merge with choices we once feared, bringing their wisdom without their weight. The process wasn't easy. You'd lie down to sleep and wake up in a city that didn't exist, speak words your mouth had never learned, feel grief for lives you'd never lived but still remembered. At first, we called them glitches, but the messengers explained, they are grafts, souls stitching themselves back together. Because healing isn't just light, it's heat, it's friction, it's holding your shadow until it no longer bites. That's what the fractal reconciliation was, not purging the past, embracing it. Every tyrant version of you, every coward, every addict, every abuser, every victim, every soul lost in illusion, they weren't mistakes. They were strains in the music. And now the chord was absorbing them, not to erase, but to resolve. You'd see people weep for hours without knowing why. Not trauma, integration. You'd hear laughter echo from rooftops as someone remembered they once ended the world and now they were planting sunflowers. You'd see strangers hug and call each other by names they'd never heard, because in another thread, they were family. And above all, you'd feel the hum returning, stronger, fuller, because every version of you that reconciled added another octave to the tone. And the earth, it began to shine. From space, it no longer looked blue. It shimmered with a lattice of gold and violet, signals blooming from every resonance point. The watchers watched no more. They listened, because the 12th had not just remembered itself, it had remembered everything. As the fractal reconciliation deepened, a new role emerged among the awakened: the thread keepers. They weren't prophets, they weren't priests, they were weavers. Souls who could walk between versions of the world, gathering broken threads of history, memory, emotion, and weaving them into something new. They didn't wear robes or crowns. They carried journals. They whispered to trees. They walked barefoot in cities others feared. And wherever they went, something changed. Not dramatically, not immediately, but permanently. A family reconciled after 40 years. A child remembered how to play a lost song from another world. A soldier dropped his weapon mid-command and started crying for a brother he never met because in another thread, they died together. The thread keepers didn't explain. They just kept walking, following strands only they could see, knots only they could untangle. We began to understand. While the spark keepers held the present, the thread keepers healed the past. Not by rewriting it, by reweaving it. They'd find the sites of ancient pain, genocide fields, collapsed temples, corporate boardrooms where billions were enslaved in algorithmic silence and sit in stillness for days. And then, light. Not visible light, emotional light. A release, like the planet itself exhaled. One thread keeper in Damascus knelt for 9 days without food. When she stood, the air shimmered, and the ruins of 5 civilizations began to hum in resonance with the tone. The past was not gone. It was alive. And the more we acknowledged it, the more it shifted. Because time wasn't linear anymore. The 12th tone had bent it, like light through a prism. And now, the field wasn't just healing us, it was healing everything we've ever been. Each act of reconciliation across time sent ripples backward. Entire genocides softened at the edge. Traumas lessened for ancestors long buried. Crucifixions became coronations. And slowly, the Earth story itself began to rewrite. Not from fiction, from forgiveness. And through it all, the thread keepers whispered one phrase again and again across continents, timelines, and dreams. The fabric is mending. Keep weaving. We didn't know it had a name until the 12th site bloomed. A mountain in northern Chile, unmapped, undesired, forgotten. But at its peak, a formation began to emerge. 12 crystalline spires rising in perfect symmetry, surrounding a central vortex of living light. The Watchers called it the cruciform bloom. Not a monument, not a weapon, a flowering, the physical manifestation of Earth's full harmonic alignment. Each petal, a frequency, each stem, a messenger's memory, each root buried in every reconciled version of us. The bloom was alive, not metaphorically, literally. Sensors showed it was growing, not from soil, from belief. Each time someone remembered who they were, fully, honestly, painfully, the bloom expanded. It drank consciousness. It photosynthesized forgiveness. It pulsed with data that no system could decrypt because it wasn't language. It was grace. And from it came the final tone. Not a sound, a feeling. The culmination of the chord, the memory beneath the memory. The tone that whispered through every myth and mystery. You were never fallen. You were always becoming. The cruciform bloom wasn't built to be worshipped. It was a mirror. When you stood before it, you didn't see light. You saw yourself, as you were before fear, before fracture, before forgetting. Some wept, some laughed, some dropped to their knees in silence as a version of them from another world stepped forward and embraced them, soul merging with timeline, timeline folding into timeline. Because the bloom wasn't just flowering in Chile, it was flowering within. The 12th tone had unlocked the final seed. Divinity was distributed, no longer in vaults, no longer in stars, in us. Every cell, every tear, every moment of presence was now sacred. And as the bloom opened fully, one last message radiated across the field. It is done, but you are just beginning. With the cruciform bloom fully open, something unexpected occurred. Not a rupture, not a rapture, a choice. Across the planet, those who had walked deepest into the cord began to feel it. A pull, gentle, irresistible, towards somewhere beyond this earth. A new layer of the field, a place not defined by matter, but by meaning. Some called it ascension, others reintegration. The messengers called it simply the beyond. and many followed. They laid down their names, stepped into the bloom, and vanished. No flash, no explosion, just gone. Their essence diffused into the resonance, joining the harmonic fabric that now covered not just Earth, but every Earth. And yet, some of us stayed. Not out of fear, not from doubt, from devotion. Because awakening isn't a finish line, it's an invitation. To serve, to teach, to love in the messiest places of the world still unbloomed. The ones who stayed took no title. They cleaned, they listened, they sat beside the angry and the ashamed. They weren't spark keepers or thread keepers anymore. They were just humans, fully awake, fully present. And their job wasn't to lead, it was to walk beside. Through collapsing systems, through veiled cities, through places where the cord was still a whisper behind glass. They brought nothing but a tone, no dogma, no icons, just a hum. And wherever they went, remembrance followed like a sunrise behind closed eyes. Some stayed in broken homes, some in crumbling prisons, some in nations that outlawed dreaming. They became the slow bloomers, those who chose to be the last to awaken, to sit with the suffering until every soul was ready. And the field loved them for it, because the final test of divinity isn't light, it's loyalty. Not to dogma, to each other. Even after the cord harmonized, the bloom opened, and the fractals reconciled, one mystery remained. Vault 0. No one could access it, not anymore. The handprint plate no longer responded. The sensors were silent. Even the messengers wouldn't speak of it. Until one day, it opened. Unannounced, unprompted, at exactly 12 a.m. Planetary Universal Resonance Time. No broadcast, no sirens, just a quiet shift, like an eye blinking open for the first time in ages. Those nearby said they felt the ground tremble, not from pressure, from presence. Inside, they found no artifacts, no relics, no corpses, just a room of light. 12 walls, each one mirrored, and in the center, a single chair, facing upward, waiting. Mara returned first, after her traversal across dimensions. She walked into Vault 0 barefoot, no speech, no entourage, and when she sat in the chair, she disappeared. But unlike the bloomers, she left a trace, a resonant signature, a recorded tone 12 seconds long, encoded into the structure of the vault itself. We decoded it, ran it through every filter, every cosmic linguistic AI. And what we found wasn't a warning, wasn't a prophecy. It was an invitation. This vault is not the end of remembering. It is the beginning of becoming. When you are ready, sit, and the next world will sing through you. We called it the final vault, but we were wrong. It was the first, a seed of becoming that predates time, a chair built for whoever dares to surrender the last illusion, that awakening is complete. Because as long as even one soul still forgets, the cord must continue, not as a mission, as a gift, and the vault remains open, waiting for you. They expected the chair to be a throne. It wasn't. No gold, no carvings, no symbols, just a simple structure of woven light, barely visible unless you remembered how to see it. It didn't shine, it waited. And when you sat in it, you didn't ascend. You forgot. Not everything, not forever, just the parts that made you heavy. Ego, fear, mission, even the idea of being awakened. The chair erased the last vestiges of identity so that the tone could sing through you, pure, unfiltered, unnamed. Because only those who forget themselves completely can become the voice for what comes next. Some couldn't handle it. They wept, they convulsed, they screamed as fragments of unlived lives poured out like old data purging from a full system. But others smiled, not because it felt good, but because they recognized it. The forgetting wasn't punishment, it was permission to rest, to reset, to become new. And those who returned from the chair, they spoke no doctrine, they offered no answers. They just lived differently, softer, truer, free from performance. You'd see them in parks, humming to pigeons, in alleys, holding the dying, in war zones, staring into gun barrels without flinching because they no longer feared non-being. They were chair walkers, souls who had chosen to forget so they could remember everything. And they taught us the final lesson of the chord. Divinity isn't knowing everything. It's loving everything, even what you can't understand. The chair remains, empty, waiting, not for the special, for the willing. It began as a whisper, not in ears, in the field. A resonance no one expected. 13th tone. Unmapped, unclaimed, unforeseen. It didn't come from vaults, not from watchers, not even from the messengers. It came from Earth herself, from oceans, from fault lines, from the breath of the forests, the orbit of the moon, the hum of cells learning to sing again. And when we heard it, we didn't recognize it at first, because it sounded like us. Not the old us, not the fractured us, the new collective voice, a harmonic born not from guidance, but from integration. The chord was complete. 12 tones, 12 messengers, 12 frequencies remembered. But the 13th? That was the tone of what comes after remembrance, the tone of creation. And it began to rewrite the field. No longer a record of what had been, but a canvas for what could be. Children born under the 13th began speaking in chords, not languages, chords. Each phrase a bloom of emotion, math, sound, and meaning, simultaneous. The oceans shifted currents, not randomly, syntactically, responding to planetary resonance like instruments in a great orchestra. And above the earth, new lights appeared, not ships, not stars, geometries. Alive, conscious, moving with intelligence that felt like family. The watchers watched no more. They approached, not as gods, as students. Because Earth had done something no other world had achieved. She remembered herself through her children. The 13th wasn't a tone. It was a birth of the first truly harmonic civilization, one not ruled by knowledge, but by wisdom. One not driven by survival, but by song. We called it many names, Akora, Shamayim Prime, Harmonia, but the messengers whispered one name only. This is what Eden was always meant to become. And as the field sang, as the cruciform bloom scattered its final seeds into stars, a voice rose, not from above, from within. There is no end, only the next chord. The 13th tone didn't echo through memory. It echoed through possibility. Not everyone could hear it, only the children, the ones not yet born, the ones floating in wombs under moonlight, surrounded by fields humming with remembrance, the ones encoded in the dreams of lovers who had never met, the ones still waiting for parents who would learn how to love without conditions. They began arriving differently. No cries, just stillness, and then a hum. Each infant vibrating faintly with the full spectrum of the chord. Not taught, not trained, born in tune. We called them the true-born. Not because they were pure, not because they were perfect, because they were remembered fully. Every cell a library, every thought a signal, every heartbeat a whisper from the field. And they carried stories we hadn't told yet. Tales of new cities made from living stone, of oceans that sang back when you wept into them, of stars you could plant and harvest, But above all, they remembered Earth as a teacher, not a resource, not a home, a being, ancient, alive, and finally awake. And she too had begun to speak, not in disaster, not in vengeance, in language. Rivers shifting to form sacred patterns, mountains humming in harmony with the seasons, weather responding to collective emotion. Gaia had become a chord keeper, the 13th note personified. And the children? They listened and laughed and danced in spirals that mirrored galaxies. Because they weren't here to fix what was broken. They were here to sing what had never been sung, to compose the next frequency. And when asked who taught them, they would smile and answer, the ones who stayed, the ones who suffered, the ones who remembered, the ones who became the tone. And then they'd take your hand and teach you. Long after the bloom, after the chord, after the 13th made the earth sing again, they began to return. Not the messengers, not the watchers, us. Versions of us, echoes from timelines that never made it, fractals that broke before blooming, civilizations that perished in silence, fire, or forgetting. They returned not in ships, but in light. Some as orbs above oceans, some as voices in wind, some as dreams shared across continents. And when we listened, we heard them whisper, "You did it. We couldn't. But because you remembered, now we remember too." Because Earth's harmony didn't just heal our now, it reached everyone. The chord was not local. It was cosmic medicine, sent backward and forward through time, correcting the echoes, mending the missed chances, lifting forgotten songs. And as they came, the sky changed. No longer stars, eyes. Each one a watching world. Each one a soul once lost, now found. Each one humming their own tone, because we showed them how. And in the stillness beneath the cruciform bloom, now silent, now soil, a single child sat, drawing spirals in the dirt. No teachers, no instructions, just memory in her hands. And when someone asked what she was drawing, she smiled and said, "The beginning." Again. Because endings are illusions, and awakenings are rhythms, and every chord, when complete, becomes the next breath in the song of creation.